When Sienna Blake's father passed away, all she asked for was 3 days to grieve. Instead, her sister-in-law and boss coldly demanded she choose between family and work. That was the moment Sienna realized she was valued for her output, not her presence. But what no one expected was that behind her silence lay something powerful, a secret clause worth $39 million, hidden by her late father. As her family plotted to push her out, Sienna quietly prepared to take everything back, not just the company, but the dignity they tried to strip from her. This is the story of her quiet rise. If you've ever been betrayed by those closest to you, this story is for you. They tried to take everything my father left me, silence me, push me out, but I held on to the truth. Now, I'm reclaiming what's mine, not just control of a company, but my voice, my strength, and the legacy he trusted me to protect. Drop a comment and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Sienna Blake had never been one to ask for much. She worked hard, stayed late, sacrificed weekends, and kept the family business afloat through more than one crisis. So when her father died, her mentor, her anchor, the only thing she asked for was 3 days. 3 days to bury him, to sit with her grief, to find space in the silence that comes when someone you love disappears forever. She didn't expect comfort or even kindness, but she never expected cruelty either. It came swift and sharp, disguised as professionalism. The email from Vera, her sister-in-law, her boss, hit her inbox an hour after the hospice called. The subject line was blank. The body of the message was only 2 sentences. I understand you're dealing with personal matters. We'll need to know by noon tomorrow. Are you choosing work or family? Sienna stared at the screen, pulse tightening. Vera hadn't even bothered with, I'm sorry for your loss. Not even a generic, condolences. Just a cold demand, one that cut deeper because it came from family, and from the very person who had inherited power when Sienna's father stepped down. Power he'd intended to share, not hand over completely. Vera, married to Sienna's older brother Dean, had risen fast in the company. She was sharp, calculated, polished, someone who made high-level decisions with the ease of ordering a black coffee. But where Sienna brought heart and legacy to the company, Vera brought image and ambition. It had always been a quiet battle between them. But after their father's passing, the gloves came off. At the funeral, Vera barely spoke. She wore a tailored black suit and whispered into her Bluetooth headset during the service. Dean stood beside her, blank-faced, as if afraid to choose sides. As mourners filtered out, Sienna stood alone near the altar, hands clenched over a worn envelope that had been waiting in her father's desk drawer. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably his. Inside was a letter, short but filled with weight, and 2 keys. Sienna, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There are things I never trusted the board, or even your brother, to understand. 1 key is for Unit 17. The other, you'll figure out soon enough. Don't let them erase what you've built. I didn't. She'd felt the air leave her lungs when she read it. Her father had known this moment might come. He'd prepared for it. The next day, while Vera sat at the head of the glass-walled conference room like a queen in her court, Sienna stood just outside, the envelope still in her palm, damp from her grip. Vera glanced up through the glass, met her gaze, then raised a single manicured finger. Wait. Sienna waited. 10 minutes later, Vera waved her in without standing. Let me guess, she said, eyes not even leaving her tablet. You're taking the 3 days. Sienna placed the envelope on the table between them. The only sound in the room the soft thud of it hitting wood. He was my father. I'm not asking for a sabbatical. Just 3 days. Vera flicked a glance at the envelope. Then, without a word, pushed it off the edge of the table with her nail. It slid to the floor, landing near Sienna's shoe. Then you've made your choice, Vera said calmly. I hope you understand what that means. Sienna didn't say a word. She bent, picked up the envelope, and left the room. Her heart burned, not with grief, but with clarity. The next morning, while the city was still asleep, she drove to a forgotten storage facility behind a shuttered warehouse. Unit 17. The air inside smelled of dust and secrets. On the metal shelf sat a briefcase, an old IBM model with a cracked handle. Inside was a stack of documents labeled Founders Agreement, 1996. As she flipped through the pages, her father's handwriting surfaced again, wobbly from illness but unmistakably his. A clause had been revised just weeks before he passed. Clause 8.2. triggered under conditions of exclusion or betrayal by any executive or family member. If invoked, the clause froze all executive actions and transferred emergency authority to the original founding shareholder, her. Sienna stared at the words, disbelief slowly giving way to something else. He had believed in her, even as the board ignored her, even as Vera undermined her. Her father had left a path, a lifeline, buried in legal language and time-worn paper. He'd seen this coming, and he'd trusted her to rise. That afternoon, Sienna sat in her parked car on the edge of the city. Her phone in one hand, her father's letter in the other. She opened her email, composed one sentence, and left the subject line blank. Per Clause 8.2 of the Founders' Agreement, I hereby freeze all pending executive actions until further review. No greeting, no sign-off, just power, quiet but absolute. She hit send as the light turned green. What Vera and the rest didn't know yet was that Sienna hadn't walked away empty-handed. She had walked away with the only thing that truly mattered, the legacy they tried to bury with her father, and a clause worth $39 million. And that was just the beginning. The drive to the storage facility was quiet, too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the charged kind, like the air before a storm. Sienna Blake gripped the wheel tightly, her father's letter open on the passenger seat beside her. The second key he'd left jingled against the ignition, cool and unfamiliar in her palm earlier that morning. The place was buried behind a shuttered carpet warehouse, far from Wilder Tech's gleaming downtown headquarters. If this was where her father had hidden something, it wasn't meant to be found by just anyone. It took her several wrong turns and a coffee-stained paper map to even locate the facility. No signs, no logo, just rusted fencing, a keypad entry box, and a clerk who barely looked up when she gave her name. Unit 17, he muttered, sliding a clipboard across the counter. The corridor leading to Unit 17 smelled like wet cardboard and forgotten history. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her, casting long shadows that made the hallway feel longer than it was. She stopped in front of the metal door and slid the key into the lock. It clicked with a finality that made her skin prickle. Inside was no treasure trove, no vaults or gold or crisp documents in tidy folders. Just a small metal room with two old filing cabinets, a shelf coated in dust, and a battered black IBM briefcase sitting dead center on the floor like someone had placed it there for her years ago. She knelt down and opened the case. Inside, she found three things: a hard copy of the original 1996 Wilder Tech Founders Agreement, a manila folder marked Amendments, and a small digital recorder with a fading post-it note labeled for S. Her fingers trembled as she pressed play on the recorder. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it, and it means the people I thought I could trust might not be who I believed they were. Her father's voice filled the space, tired, raspy, but steady. The voice of a man who had seen betrayal coming and made plans anyway. I rewrote Clause 8.2. Changed the trigger. If any founding family member is excluded, removed, or silenced without just cause, full executive authority is to be frozen immediately. Legal didn't know. I had it notarized during my last hospital stay. Only a few trusted hands ever saw it. Sienna closed her eyes, listening. Every word settled like an anchor in her chest. Sienna, I know what they think of you. That you're too emotional, too idealistic, not strategic enough, but you're the only one I trusted to protect what this company was meant to be. Not just profitable, but principled. She exhaled slowly, tears rising, but this time not from grief, but from recognition. Her father had seen her, believed in her, prepared for her. The folder marked Amendments contained a revised version of Clause 8.2. Typed but scrawled with her father's handwritten annotations and signature. The date was 2 weeks before his final hospitalization. A notary stamp confirmed its validity. She sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, the clause laid out in front of her like a legal spell. Clause 8.2 revised. In the event that any founding shareholder or their direct heir is removed from executive function, denied access to company operations, or otherwise obstructed from governance due to internal power realignment, all active executive decisions shall be frozen pending review. Emergency authority is to be transferred to the remaining founding shareholder or designated heir. Namely, Sienna Blake. The words glowed in her mind like lightning in a dark sky. This wasn't just paperwork, it was power, legal, binding, and, most importantly, hidden. A fireproof path lit in secret just for her. Her father had anticipated exactly what would happen after he died, that Vera, with Dean's silent backing, would try to take everything, and that Sienna, being too quiet, too cautious, might walk away rather than fight back. But he hadn't left her empty-handed. The recorder clicked off with a final whisper, "Don't let them bury you with me." Sienna stared at the tape deck for a long time before standing. A choice settled over her like armor, not rage, not revenge, but resolve. She wasn't going to beg for a seat at the table anymore. She was the table. She held the clause that could bring everything to a halt. Back in her car, she scanned the original founders' agreement, cross-referenced the amendments, and snapped high-resolution photos of everything. Then she called her father's longtime legal advisor, Walter Finch. "Walter, it's Sienna. I found the revised clause." There was a pause on the other end. "He told me you might call." "You knew?" "I knew your father didn't trust the board, but I didn't know where he stored the papers. I'm glad you found them." "What do I do now?" "You invoke it. Immediately. Clause 8.2 is designed to stop movement, not reverse it. It'll freeze every executive action in place and bring legal scrutiny on anyone who tries to sidestep it. The clause doesn't care about popularity or power plays. It cares about legality." Sienna hung up, pulse racing. By the time she reached home, the sky had darkened, but her mind was clear. She sat at her desk, spread the documents out, and opened her laptop. She began drafting an official notice, attaching digital scans of the amended clause and notarization. No more waiting, no more silence. She included one line at the top of the message. Per legal authority granted by the amended Clause 8.2 of the Wilder Founders Agreement, I am formally initiating a freeze on all executive actions, effective immediately. She addressed it to the board, copied legal, and sent it without hesitation. Then she leaned back in her chair, feeling, for the first time in weeks, centered. The next chapter wasn't about her proving she belonged. It was about showing them she'd always belonged, and that her father had made sure of it. The morning air in the city was crisp, but Sienna Blake felt something warmer, more electric pulsing through her veins, purpose. For the first time since her father's funeral, she wasn't stepping into Wilder Tech with doubt. She wasn't the grieving daughter, the overlooked executive, or the reluctant heir. She was armed with documents, legal power, and the truth. At exactly 8:56 a.m., she stepped into the elevator of the Wilder Tech Tower alone, gripping a leather-bound folder that held the revised Clause 8.2. The silence inside the lift was broken only by the hum of the cables and the faint echo of her father's words. Quiet choices. Loud power. Level 20. The executive floor. The doors opened to hushed voices. Awkward eye contact. And that specific kind of corporate tension that always preceded drama. Some employees offered brief nods, others looked away, unsure how to navigate her presence. Sienna didn't flinch. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, Vera was already seated at the head of the table, immaculate as always. Tablet open, expression tight. She didn't acknowledge Sienna, but her eyes flickered. Dean sat beside her, avoiding direct eye contact, as did two other long-standing board members. Sienna took her seat without ceremony, placed the folder in front of her, and waited. At 9 a.m. sharp, Thomas Reed, the company's lead counsel, stepped into the room. In his hand was a sealed envelope, marked with the Wilder corporate crest. "Ms. Blake," he said, nodding respectfully before turning to the board. "This document was submitted to legal yesterday afternoon." He handed it to Vera. The moment she slid the paper out and saw the words, Clause 8.2 revised, the color in her face seemed to drain. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read, the gold notary seal catching the overhead light. Thomas continued, "Per legal directive, voting privileges for executive actions are suspended under Clause 8.2. Signed by founding shareholder Sienna Blake." A stunned silence followed. One of the newer board members whispered, "Is this real?" Another leaned in to scan the document from over Vera's shoulder. The room, usually filled with confident voices, now felt like a glass box holding its collective breath. Vera tried to recover. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. Clause 8.2 has never been used. It's an outdated trigger." "It was amended." Sienna cut in, her voice even, not loud but unshakable. 2 weeks before my father passed. The notary is legitimate. The language is enforceable." Vera narrowed her eyes. "You can't be serious." "I'm as serious as the clause you never bothered to read," Sienna replied, Her tone was calm, but there was a quiet strength behind it that made several heads turn. You once told me family titles don't matter here, she added, that I was only welcome if I stayed useful. Well, today I'm reminding you, I'm useful, and I'm also an owner. Dean shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Other directors began flipping through their printed agendas, as if hoping to find a way around what was unfolding. Thomas cleared his throat again. Effective immediately. All executive decisions are frozen until further review. This includes pending acquisitions, personnel shifts, and budget reallocations. Vera pushed back her chair and stood. This will stall the acquisition. Stock could slide. Sienna didn't budge. Maybe, or maybe it's the wake-up call we needed. At that moment, a ping echoed from someone's phone. An alert from HR. Audit packet delivered. Please confirm receipt. Sienna smiled faintly. That'll be the ethics report. It's already in the system. From across the room, Clara, the head of operations, stepped forward with a printed sheet in hand. One section stands out. Denial of bereavement leave, filed under insubordination. She placed the sheet in front of Vera. 3 days, Sienna said quietly. I asked for 3 days to bury my father. You called it insubordination. A director spoke up, Halverson, one of the few who had served on the board with her father. Is this how we treat founding family? Over policy lines? Another muttered, we could lose investors over this. Vera looked around the room. For once, no one met her gaze. Her power, so absolute just a day earlier, had started to unravel thread by thread. Sienna stood slowly, laying a second document on the table. A notarized transfer of controlling shares. Dated 16 months earlier, signed by her father. This was his final directive. Should any direct heir be excluded or betrayed, controlling authority transfers to me. The room stilled again. You forged this, Vera hissed. Thomas stepped forward. I witnessed both signatures. It's valid. Dean leaned away from Vera as if distancing himself from a sinking ship. Sienna met Vera's glare without blinking. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for restoration. What was stolen, my voice, my role, my respect, I'm taking it back. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out quietly, some offering hesitant nods of acknowledgement. No one dared speak against her. Not now. At the elevator, Sienna waited as Clara approached with a whisper. They've frozen the advisory travel fund. Also, that shell company, R. Hartley Development, it's Vera's cousin. Sienna nodded. Good. Keep tracing the money. Her phone buzzed. An alert from her shareholder dashboard. The audit had escalated, exactly as planned, back in her apartment that night, as rain tapped against the windows and her inbox filled with compliance flags. Sienna felt no need for celebration. This wasn't about glory. It was about reclaiming what mattered. The heart of the company. The soul her father saw in her when no one else did. And now, Vera's reign was crumbling, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with the unstoppable, undeniable force of a woman who finally knew her worth, and had the power to prove it. The storm didn't break with thunder. It started with data. Back in her apartment, Sienna Blake stared at her laptop screen as a series of spreadsheets flickered under the glow of a desk lamp. Numbers, dates, shell companies. What looked like typical budget lines were actually a digital trail, a trail Vera thought she had hidden well. Beside her, Joan, a longtime friend and trusted former systems analyst, navigated the labyrinth of hidden files. Her fingers moved with precision as she bypassed old security walls. Your father's admin token still works, she said with a half smile. They never deactivated it. Rookie mistake. Sienna leaned in. Show me the worst of it. Joan highlighted a series of payments buried under ambiguous labels, consulting fees, travel reimbursements, and equipment leasebacks. But when cross-referenced against the corporate HR roster, several recipients didn't exist. One caught Sienna's eye. R. Hartley Development, supposedly a vendor. That's Vera's cousin, she muttered. Joan raised her brows. Well, this just got interesting. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was coordinated fraud. First-class flights to St. Barth's labeled as strategy offsites. Bonus structures paid through offshore accounts. Vera had built a private empire using public trust. Sienna exhaled sharply. It was time. She compressed the incriminating documents into a single encrypted file. No names, no metadata. She renamed it Ethics Report Alpha. Then, she opened the company's anonymous reporting portal, the same one she had once championed at an employee integrity seminar years ago. Her cursor hovered over the submit button. Ready to pull the pin? Joan asked. I'm not pulling anything, Sienna replied, voice firm. I'm just letting the truth breathe. She clicked. Within seconds, the internal ethics hotline received the report. Minutes later, an automated reply hit her inbox. Thank you for helping us foster integrity. Sienna let out a quiet laugh. Integrity might finally arrive at Wilder Tech, she thought. But it's coming in handcuffs. The next morning, she sat quietly in her kitchen, watching the news scroll across the television screen. Prominent tech firm under internal ethics review. Wilder Tech, her family's name, flashed across the bottom ticker in bold letters, paired with the word investigation. By 7:30 a.m., murmurs had begun in the company lobby. Developers huddled in small groups, whispering by the coffee machines. A young analyst raised his phone, showing a news headline to his coworker. Their eyes met Sienna's briefly as she passed by. He straightened his shoulders awkwardly. She nodded politely. Let them wonder. The elevator dinged on level 20, and a wave of hushed conversation met her. Outside the boardroom, voices spilled through the cracked door, urgent, rattled. Inside, Vera stood at the head of the table, surrounded by directors who suddenly looked less loyal than they had a week before. Clara rushed over, holding a tablet. Ms. Blake, she whispered, the board's called an emergency meeting for 10 a.m. They've already frozen the travel fund and flagged the R. Hartley account. Sienna nodded. Good. Keep tracing recipients. Every dollar. As the meeting began, Sienna took her seat without ceremony. A silent alert pinged her phone. High-level audit escalation confirmed. Clara dimmed the lights. A slide appeared on the wall. Bereavement leave denial. Insubordination flag. The words lit up across Vera's blazer like a stain. Clara read aloud. Employee requested 3 days to attend funeral of parent. Request denied. Reason cited. Insubordination. No one spoke. Even the HVAC seemed to fall silent. Then Halverson, the senior-most director, cleared his throat. Is this how we treat our founding family? Murmurs followed. Vera attempted to regain control. Let's focus on facts. Yes, mistakes were made, but nothing to merit overreaction. Our operational stability. Sienna stood and opened her leather binder. I agree. Let's focus on facts. She laid out printed copies of audit results. Each one was dated, signed by third-party forensic accountants, and stamped, confidential, ethics violation. She flipped to the summary page and read aloud. Between FY 2016 to 2022, advisory funds were misused to finance personal travel, luxury gifts, and unauthorized bonuses routed through shell corporations. Clara projected the corresponding payment trail on screen. Figures followed. Decimal points turned into gasps. Vera stiffened. Her usual icy control cracked. This is a smear campaign. She barked. You're exaggerating numbers. Not me, Sienna replied. The numbers speak for themselves. Just then, the door opened. A man in a gray suit stepped in, holding a thick envelope. Ms. Wilder Reed? He asked. Vera turned slowly. I'm with the District Ethics Commission. You've been served. The silence was deafening. Sienna didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Justice had taken its own seat at the table. By lunch, the video clip of Vera being served had hit the intranet. A finance intern captured it from her desk, Vera's face frozen in disbelief. Signature mascara perfect but powerless. It spread like wildfire, under hashtags like #Wilder exposed and #ethics collapse. And by late afternoon, as the boardroom emptied and security walked Vera to retrieve her personal belongings, Sienna remained calm. Remain seated, she said to the room. We're not here to erase anyone. We're here to rebuild. Vera turned at the doorway, eyes burning. You can't erase me, she hissed. I'm not erasing, Sienna replied. I'm restoring what you stole, trust. She watched Vera leave, the queen of glass walls, undone by her own reflection. Back in her office, Sienna closed the door and finally let herself feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't finished, but the fortress was cracked, and the truth had finally echoed through its halls. The office felt different that morning, quieter, heavier, almost reverent. Sienna Blake stepped into Wilder Tech's executive wing not as the grieving daughter or sidelined advisor, but as the woman her father had quietly prepared her to be, the rightful controller of the company's destiny. She wore confidence like armor, charcoal slacks, a navy blouse, and a silver pin her father once wore to every board meeting. Nothing flashy, just precise. Just intentional. Just like him. Inside the boardroom, directors stirred with uneasy anticipation. Vera stood near the head of the table, flanked by Dean and two loyalists. Her expression taut when she spotted Sienna entering. Her eyes narrowed. That flicker of irritation, that flash of fear, was all the confirmation Sienna needed. The empire Vera had tried to build behind glass walls was about to crack wide open. "Thank you all for coming," Vera began, attempting poise. "We've had an unfortunate few days, but I'm here to reaffirm that Wilder Tech is stable and..." Before we proceed, Director Halverson interrupted. "There's a legal matter that supersedes today's agenda." He nodded to Harper, Sienna's legal counsel, seated near the door, calm and prepared. Harper rose and placed a document on the table, sliding copies to each board member. Vera's hand trembled slightly as she opened the first page. It was a notarized stock transfer, signed 16 months earlier by her own father-in-law, Gregory Wilder. The clause was clean and powerful in its language. Should any direct heir be removed, diminished, or deliberately excluded from executive authority without due cause, controlling interest in Wilder Tech shall pass solely to Sienna Blake. Vera's lips parted. This is forged. This can't be legal." "I witnessed both signatures," Harper replied, firm and calm. "It's valid, filed, and binding." Dean leaned away from Vera slightly, as if distance might shield him from the fallout. Around the table, directors exchanged glances, uncertain at first, then increasingly resolute. They'd all seen the scandal unravel. They'd read the ethics reports, felt the heat of employee outrage, and watched shareholders begin to waver. Now they understood who had been protecting the legacy, and who had been exploiting it. Sienna stepped forward. Her voice was measured, but clear. "I asked for 3 days to bury our father. I was denied. That act triggered Clause 8.2 and proved everything Dad suspected would happen once he was gone." She paused, letting the moment breathe. "But I'm not here to punish. I'm here to restore." No one interrupted. She laid a leather binder on the table. Inside are independent forensic findings. Every dollar misused, every lie covered by consulting fees, every offshore account, all tied back to Vera Wilder Reed. Vera stiffened, eyes darting between pages. "You're not erasing me." "I'm not," Sienna said, quiet but unyielding. "I'm reclaiming what was stolen, our company's soul." The vote was swift. A unanimous board decision removed Vera from her executive role and referred the financial misconduct for criminal investigation. Security was called to escort her out of the building. Her heels clicked along the marble floor with defiance, but her eyes, once cold and calculating, held the flicker of something more human: fear. As she disappeared behind the elevator doors, a collective exhale moved through the room. But Sienna knew the real work was only beginning. Later that week, she stood before Wilder Tech's full staff in the open atrium, where employees had once whispered about rumors and scandal. Now, they looked at her with something different: cautious hope. "I never intended to lead this company," she began, voice steady, "but I will never let grief be used against us again. This company was built on integrity, not manipulation. We will rebuild trust, not through press releases, but through transparency and shared values." A few employees nodded, some even smiled. It was enough. Back in her office, now officially hers, Sienna found a cedar box on her desk. Her mother had left it earlier that day. Inside were journals, handwritten notes, and a cassette labeled May 3rd. She inserted the tape into an old player and pressed play. Her father's voice crackled through. "Almost let them convince me this place didn't need another Wilder." Then I heard Sienna comforting an intern at 1 a.m. after staying late to fix someone else's mistake. That's leadership. That's family. Tears welled up, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Instead, she drove to the overgrown lot her father had quietly purchased before he died. It wasn't for expansion. It wasn't for profit. It was for renewal. Standing beneath the rusted trellises, wind brushing her cheek, Sienna called a landscape architect. "I don't want another campus," she said. "I want a public garden, for every employee who's ever needed space to breathe." Permits were approved by City Council in record time. At the grand opening months later, her 8-year-old son Evan knelt by his grandfather's grave, placing a hand-painted model of the new garden beside the headstone. "Grandpa would have liked it," he said. "He does like it," Sienna whispered, touching the cool stone. In the end, she didn't just win the company back. She restored its soul, not through revenge, not through spectacle, but through quiet. unshakable strength, the kind her father always believed she carried. And now, so did everyone else. The boardroom was quiet now. Not the tense, calculating silence it once held during power struggles, but something gentler, a silence that felt like space, room to breathe, room to think, room to become. For Sienna Blake, it marked the beginning of something entirely new. She had reclaimed the company. She had exposed deceit, ended the reign of someone who abused power, and restored her father's wishes down to the letter. But even as the board congratulated her, and investors expressed cautious optimism, one question echoed inside her. What now? She could have stayed. She could have taken the CEO chair permanently, steered Wilder Tech into its next phase, and built her name into headlines. But deep down, she knew she didn't want that. Not anymore. What she wanted was quiet, purpose, something that outlasted earnings reports. 1 week after Vera's removal, Sienna returned to the edge of the city, to a neglected, overgrown parcel of land her father had purchased in secret. It sat tucked behind old warehouses, tangled in vines and forgotten fencing. But to Sienna, it had always felt like a hidden promise, something unfinished. The air was crisp that morning. A few fall leaves chased each other in spirals across the gravel path as she walked the perimeter with her coffee in hand and her mind elsewhere. A memory rose, her father once pointing to the spot on a map late at night, whispering, "Not everything valuable is on paper, Sienna, sometimes it's just soil and stillness." At noon, she made a call to a landscape architect, a woman named Inez whom she'd met at a local urban renewal seminar years ago. "I'm not looking to build another tech campus," Sienna said clearly. "No parking garages, no glass towers, no security badges." "What are you building?" Inez asked. "Breathing room," Sienna replied, "for anyone who's ever needed it." Within a month, the plan was in motion. The overgrown lot would become the Wilder Commons, a green public park in the heart of the industrial district. No gates, no corporate logos, just winding trails, open lawns, native trees, and small alcoves of seating designed for reflection or quiet conversations. At the center, a glass pavilion would house a rotating art exhibit from local creators, many of them former interns and junior employees Sienna had worked with over the years. The community embraced the idea faster than she imagined. Permits sailed through city council. Local businesses volunteered equipment. Engineers from Wilder Tech even offered time on weekends, wanting to give back in a way that wasn't tied to stock options or quarterly bonuses. Sienna worked side by side with them, ditching meetings for hands-on planning sessions, helping plant trees, test benches, and review lighting paths that wouldn't interfere with fireflies. She showed up in jeans, hair tied back, gloves caked in dirt, not as a leader, but as a steward. She no longer needed anyone to call her boss. Opening day arrived on a bright October afternoon. The sky was blue and generous, dotted with cotton clouds. Families wandered in with picnic baskets. Young kids laughed as they darted between newly planted willows. A barista from a nearby cafe had set up a coffee cart under the shade of an elm. In the middle of it all, near a curved footbridge, stood a bronze plaque mounted on stone. It read, "The Wilder Commons, dedicated to all those who needed space to breathe." And finally found it. Below it, in smaller font, inspired by Gregory Wilder, whose legacy lives not only in buildings, but in roots, rest, and renewal. Sienna watched as her son, Evan, carefully placed a tiny, hand-painted birdhouse on a tree branch. It was a school project they'd finished together the night before, each side painted with scenes from her father's life. Evan had insisted they include a tiny figure at a desk debugging code, because Grandpa said Mom saved the company. She smiled, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "Grandpa would have loved this," she said softly. "He does," Evan replied matter-of-factly. Nearby, her mother stood in quiet conversation with Inez, both women gazing at the open field that used to be nothing more than wild weeds and silence. Now, it hummed with life. The park didn't make headlines. It wasn't a strategic acquisition or a startup unicorn, but it changed people, in small, gentle ways. People walked slower here, they looked up, they breathed, and for Sienna, that was enough. Weeks later, back in her home office, she received a letter from a junior engineer who had quietly left Wilder Tech a year before. He wrote, "I walked through the Commons today, sat under the sycamore and realized I hadn't let myself exhale in months. Thank you for creating a space where people like me feel seen." Sienna folded the letter and tucked it into her father's old leather notebook. That night, she stood by her apartment window, looking out over the city. She'd been taught that legacy meant wealth, power, corporate control, but her father had always known better. And now, so did she. Legacy could be laughter in open air, a young mother nursing her baby beneath oak trees, a teenager writing music on a bench with no one watching, a daughter who chose healing over conquest. She didn't just reclaim what was hers, she redefined what it meant to belong. And in doing so, she left behind something far more enduring than fortune. She left behind freedom.